In this video, I'm going to show you how to do sample number 8, which is called a bound seam. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, for the first step, you're going to cut out 2 identical pieces of fabric, and you're going to sew them together using a plain seam similar to sample number 4, but this time, make sure that you do a 1-inch seam allowance instead of 1/2 inch. So it needs to be that wide, the seam. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so once you have sewn your pieces together with a 1-inch seam allowance, you're going to go ahead and iron this open and flat. Alright, so the next step is you want to get some bias tape. I prefer that you just get the bias tape that's already made. We might have some here, and basically it just kind of looks like you know, a piece of tape or fabric strip that has been, you know, folded 3 times, twice in on itself and then in half, because basically we want it to look like this. So it's another mechanism for covering the raw edges. Normally they might be usually covered in bias tape that's the same color. Or if it's for aesthetic reasons, then it might be a different color. So go ahead and measure the amount you will need lengthwise twice, and make sure you add like 1 inch extra. So I'm probably going to cut mine somewhere right here, like that. It's just good to give yourself wiggle room, and then just go ahead and double that up, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I officially have 2 pieces to go on both raw edges of the flaps, and basically this is where it can get a little bit tricky, but you're going to kind of work backwards. So you can kind of just pretend to put the bias tape on the flap by putting the flap on the inside of the tape, like this. And then this is where you will work backwards. So I'm going to fold it over, and then I'm just going to undo this top half, and then undo it again. And basically what has happened is I noticed that this fabric flap only attaches to just this one edge out of these like 4 panels. And so that is how we are going to pin and sew it. So let me go back one more time. The bias tape is going to encase this, and in order to figure out how we sew it on, we work backwards. So I'm gonna push it to one side, open it up, and then when I examine it, I notice that it's just attached to this one area. So I know I'm going to sew from top down, and I'm right-handed, and I'll pull the pins out on the right side. So I'm going to put my pin in like this. And then I'll just kind of move my way outwards. Okay, so go ahead and finish pinning that. Alright, so I finished pinning it, right? We worked backwards. When you're getting ready to sew, just make sure this bias tape is completely unopened and everything is shoved to the left. You don't want to like start sewing and then accidentally, you know, like sew it like this or something and ruin it. So I'm just going to open it up and get it up on here, and we want to do inner width of the presser foot. So again, like have the edge line up with the inner of the toe. Have my pins ready, and I'm going to go ahead and start back stitch, and then you'll go ahead and finish sewing all the way down. Okay, so I officially finished sewing that one edge of the bias, and when I just kind of go back to originally what I was doing, we had to work backwards, and then when I kind of pull it all back in together and put it back inside, you can see that it's attached to that inside inner flap, and you don't see it from the outside. Then we have one more step in which we need to finalize sewing the bias tape on there because it's still loose right now. So basically what you'll do is you'll stick that, edge back inside the bias tape, and then you're going to, if that's exactly equal, we're just going to pull the bias tape like a little bit forward off center. So the fold line will end up not quite being on top of this flap edge anymore. And I will explain why in a second. Yep. Okay. Almost there. Whenever I pin, I usually like to hold the fabric with some tension between these two fingers. Takes a little bit of dexterity practice, but it can be pretty handy. Okay, so now, ouch. The reason why I did that is because you can see that it's a little bit off now, but hopefully when I sew right along, probably about here, inner width of the presser foot, it's going to end up being right along this inner edge. So pretend this pink pin is my stitch line, and I'm doing it inner width of the presser foot on the other side. I'm doing it because I want the sew line on the other side to just barely be on that same edge. And then, so when we ended up looking at it from the front, you probably won't even see the stitch line because it'll be right here along this fold. So you can see the pins right in there. So that's exact. So this is why we pull the bias tape on this side a little bit more downward, because then we can kind of hide the stitching on this side a little bit. So then after you have pinned this side, like I said, you're going to sew with this edge being on the other side of the toe. So what I mean is, now I'm going to align this bias edge up with the inside of this toe, so that when I sew, the sew line will go 1/8 inch right here along where I have these pins. So go ahead and sew that up. Okay, so I finished doing this stitch, and as you can see, it ended up right below the tape here. It is also totally acceptable to catch this edge a little bit, so my stitch line could have also been catching this bias tape just the tiniest bit. Either way is fine, but that is basically how you get it on there. And then basically you're just going to repeat this process now for the other side. So again, you're going to work backwards. It's just going to kind of be mirrored. So you would have your bias tape, open it up, stick the flap in there, and then you work backwards going the other way. So I push it over to one side, open it up, aha, and I see that now it's going to attach to this right here. And then I'm probably going to start from this top going down, so make sure my pins are able to be pulled out on the right side. So then I would pin it, sew it on at the inner width of the presser foot. Then after I sewed it, I would, you know, flip it back back to the inside because it would be attached here, you know, and then I would from the back pull this side down just a little bit, sew, and either sew catching it just a little bit here or just next to it. So that is how you do a bound or Hong Kong seam.